Last May, I met Dr. Sabine Kulia at a Regent Theological Seminary Faith and Science cohort meeting on Galliano Island, just off the coast of Vancouver. The event was sponsored by the Templeton Foundation, and I got an ask to go and be with a group of 15 people and talk about the intersection of faith and science. All expenses paid. Thank you very much, Mr. Templeton. And it was a week-long gathering where a whole bunch of us, some scientists and a lot of theologians, and I discovered there are a lot of theologians who are scientists, have their science degrees or their master's degrees in science and are now in ministry, or their PhDs and now in ministry. We all gathered together to talk about the intersection of what they called these two books that God has written. And it was that language in their invitation that caught my attention, and I knew I had to be, or wanted to be, a part of that group. So we were together to talk about how faith speaks to what science is all about and how science speaks to what faith is all about, and their core value was that where what God has spoken in science and what God has spoken in the Bible, when they don't fit together, then we're reading one of the books wrong. We're either reading science wrong or we're reading the Bible wrong. Dr. Kulia, she's a friend now. Her name is Sabine, and she goes by the name Bem. Bem just finished a 10-year stint as a senior molecular geneticist at Oak Ridge National Laboratories in Tennessee. And this past year, she started a company to further develop, and bring to market a promising new regenerative therapy for heart failure and skeletal muscle damage. And this therapy that she's bringing to market is based on something that she discovered. She was the first person to discover in late 2007 and early 2008 about a naturally occurring protein in our bodies called NEL1. She describes NEL1 as this: a large, complex signaling protein that triggers cells to produce the right environment, called the extracellular matrix, for making and maturing cells after tissue injury. And according to the company's website, which makes the science a little bit easier to understand for the rest of us, they say early data suggests that NEL1's research could lead to therapeutics that could restore proper extracellular matrix constitution and orientation in heart muscle after a myocardial infarction or heart attack, thereby preventing or alleviating heart muscle damage and subsequent loss of heart function. So the big deal is, she discovered something that, if it proves to be what they think it is, will allow for recovery from heart attacks to happen in a way that it's never happened before. And the percentages of improved healing were like astronomical in their initial studies with mice. So she's a leading scientist, or one scientist, in this burgeoning field of extracellular, what was ECM again? Matrix. I'm a little intimidated about preaching science. Arcade Fire next week? No problems, right? Artistic, love the music, but science, man, I'm a little more afraid of that. Get the words right. Okay, now Dr. Kulia is a great scientist and a world-leading scientist, but she's also a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ. And I saw the beauty of her faith as she presented her science as a person who is also embodying this deep love of God. And I saw it probably most poignantly, in a way I'll never forget, when she shared and spoke of her gratitude to God for leading her, choosing her to be the first person to see what she was able to see, her discovery. Like all scientists, she longed to change the world. She yearned for humanity's lot to somehow be made better because of something that she would be a part of discovering. She wanted to see and to understand the way scientists, only scientists do, and to discover something that had never been seen before. And so as she was sharing that moment of discovery and then realizing who allowed it to happen, her eyes were just welling up with tears and her voice was trembling. She could barely get the words out to express gratitude for the honor, God, of allowing me to be the first person in the history of humanity to see this. How amazing that God would reveal this NEL1 protein's special gift to us. How amazing that he would now bring that to all of us who are a part of humanity. Through the history of medicine, throughout the last few hundreds and millennia, we have now come to this point where we understand this, and it could be a huge breakthrough for healing. That God would think of us to show us this so that we can heal better and maybe more quickly and maybe more wholly. That God is so providentially in control and holding this world that he would nudge this particular little girl in the Philippines so many years ago to become a scientist, and then for this. That God would give us all of these fields of science that make up medical research in the world and all other science, that he would gift us with this beautiful field of study and people who are impassioned for that. That God would make a molecular geneticist. Dr. Kulia started her talk on her discovery by looking at the wider field of wound healing. And then she sort of worked her way down from the broad general description of how wound healing happens to what she discovered and what she's researching right now. As she gave her talk, this not-so-strange thing happened in me. She would be talking about science and all these truths in science, and I would be hearing all of these Christian, biblical, scriptural, theological truths in my mind playing at the same time. This is how it played out. She talked about how God has built just the fact that our bodies are even as self-healing and self-regenerating as they are is unbelievable, an unbelievable miracle. That the human body would have this capacity to regenerate is really physically quite amazing. Like wounds heal. We take that for granted. Your immune system does what your immune system is supposed to do. Innate in you is something, your neutrophils, monocytes, lymphocytes, macrophages, and everything that happens in your immune system, it kicks into gear and restores you in ways you can't imagine, have no idea about, most of us, and keeps you going, healthy and strong. Dr. Ron Skates, who was another pastor, scientist who was at the meeting, interrupted her at that point and said, I've read that our immune systems fight 50,000 pathogenic battles per hour. Our bloodstreams, lymph systems, cells, etc., are constantly being invaded, attacked by all kinds of bacteria, viruses, cancers, and other pathogens. So in this next hour, 50,000 times in you, wounds are being healed or dangers averted. And this innate regenerative power that God has built into us just made me think almost immediately of God's common grace, this doctrine that the Holy Spirit, God holds all of creation and made all of creation, but now holds it all and preserves it all in ways that we can't even imagine. Everything in the cosmos is being held together by God. Were God to take his hand off everything, it would all just fall apart. That's the doctrine of common grace. And that happens most of the time without us even thinking about it. We're being taken care of within our bodies and within our universe via all those scientific researchers trying to find a way for us to be healthier and stronger. This is what God does, Jesus said. He gives his best, the sun to warm and the rain to nourish to everyone regardless, the good, the bad, the nice, and the nasty. God provides goodness to all of his cosmos, no matter who you are. Even dictators and murderers and criminals and bank robbers have immune systems. Dr. Kulia then went on to speak about how healing requires some cells to die in order for the new cells to mature and fully regenerate. There are cells, particularly in the third stage of wound healing, that basically give themselves up so that these other cells can live. It's called apoptosis, or is the second P silent? We got enough doctors here. It's either apoptosis or apoptosis. What is it? Apoptosis. Apoptosis, says the young pre-med student. Well, you can guess where I went with that. Hard not to make the correlation to why we're here and why you believe or are searching. In the Christian story, the first thing that came to mind was what Peter wrote, where he said, by his wounds, by Jesus' wounds, we are healed. Through his death, we've been given life. We've been restored, redeemed, made new through death. What a mystery. Greater love has no one than this, then he lay down his life for his friends. To die for another is to be like Christ, is the ultimate form of love. God has built the truth of death leading to restoration and healing into your very physiology. Another interesting point that Ben made had to do with the communal nature of healing. And there was she sent me a whole pile of science articles to read. But there was one, the journal Nature, talking about the science that she's into, and it described in its introduction the nature of healing and how it works. And wrote, in the moments after an injury occurs, various intracellular and intercellular pathways must be activated and coordinated if tissue integrity and homeostasis, the right balance of things again, are to be restored. Cellular components of the immune system, the blood coagulation cascade, and the inflammatory pathways are activated in addition. Many types of cell, including immune cells, neutrophils, monocytes, lymphocytes, and dendritic cells, endothelial cells, keratinocytes, and fibroblasts undergo marked changes in gene expression and phenotype, leading to cell proliferation, differentiation, and migration. That all happens. And that multi-layered truth, that multi-systemed, interdependent, all things firing in just the right way at just the right time, reminded me of what the Apostle Paul wrote somewhere there in 1 Corinthians about another organism, about this organism, the church. He writes, now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. You were gifted, you were made for the common good. To one there's given through the Spirit the message of wisdom, to another the message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another the gift of healing by that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another lymphocyte, to another monocyte, to another macrophage, to another speaking in different kinds of tongues, to still another the interpretation of tongues. All of these are the work of one and the same healing Spirit, and he gives them to each one just as he determines, I would imagine, just at the right time, just for the right moment, just for what exactly is needed by the organism, the church. Just as he determines. The body is a unit. Though it is made up of many parts, and though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit into one body. Whether Jews or Greeks, slave or free, we were all scientists or non-scientists. We were all given the one Spirit to drink. We need every part for healing to happen in our world. Every part of the physiology that God has built into you and I, every part of this church,